On this edition of The Correspondents, a not-so-surprising win for Chechnya's Russian-backed ruler, elected for the first time by an overwhelming majority. A 2-year investigation concludes the missile that brought down Malaysia flight MH17 over Ukraine was, in fact, a Russian-made missile. And just who came out on top in the first U.S. presidential debate? Well, depending on who you talk to, the answer may also be up for debate. Hello and welcome to The Correspondents on Voice of America. I'm Mil Arcega in Washington. We begin with election news, not in Washington, but about 9,000 kilometers further east. Chechnya's longtime Kremlin-appointed leader, Ramzan Kadyrov, directly elected for the first time earlier this month by a whopping 98% of the voters. The conspicuously high figures were expected, given that Kadyrov's iron-fisted rule tolerates very little opposition. Here's VOA's Daniel Sheriff with more.
More a celebration than an exercise in democracy, as Chechen voters for the first time elected strongman Ramzan Kadyrov. The landslide win was predictable, as Kadyrov has ruled Chechnya for a decade, appointed by Russian President Vladimir Putin with almost total control. Kadyrov is seen by supporters as bringing peace and development after 2 failed wars for independence, while critics say he has become a cult of personality. A rebel like his father, they switch sides to join Putin, who spent billions to rebuild Chechnya and prop up Kadyrov, who in return cracked down on militants and critics. Political parties opposed to Kadyrov did not even campaign in Chechnya, out of fear their supporters would be persecuted.
We keep working in the regions. What motivates this? This is our republic. We were born here. We can't be indifferent to what is happening.
And to discuss what this election means for Chechnya and its citizens, I'm joined on Skype from Moscow by Moscow correspondent Daniel Sheriff, who filed that report for us. So, Daniel, listening to your piece, the opposition member that you spoke with there, Duduev, says his country can't afford to be indifferent to what's going on. But based on these election results, there doesn't seem to be a lot of desire, or among Chechens at least, to rock the boat, 98%.
Well, if we take those figures at face value, and that's a big if, the election commission was, more or less completely under the control of the local authorities inside Chechnya. And if we look at past parliamentary elections, they've had some very questionable figures, even having a higher turnout than the actual number of voters. So very questionable figures. But if we look at it, in general, though.
Okay, we seem to have lost Daniel Sheriff's connection there. We're going to try to get him back online for us, but Kadyrov seems to have a very strong following in Chechnya. I hope to get Daniel Sheriff to talk to us about that. In the meantime, as you know, Ramzan Kadyrov elected just earlier this month by a margin of 98% in the country of Chechen. Obviously, what we know is that Kadyrov is obviously a very strong Putin ally, having been installed there 10 years ago by the man himself. So what can we tell you about Chechen right now? I wish we had Daniel Sheriff to talk to us about this. We have him on phone now. Oh, okay, I'm so glad we got reconnected, Daniel, because I think you know so much more about what's going on in Chechen than I do. Okay, so Kadyrov obviously has a very strong following there in Chechnya. You mentioned that there was this cult of personality that had developed around him. What can you tell us about this man, Kadyrov?
He took over after some years after his father had been assassinated in 2004. He's been in power for nearly a decade now. He's able to bring a lot of money into Chechnya. He's got very close relations with Russian President Vladimir Putin, and that allows him to get the kind of support that can rebuild large parts of Chechnya. So certainly there is a large chunk of the population that does support him because they see him as having brought stability to a large degree, brought peace after these two terrible wars, and bringing in a lot of money and to some degree, quite a bit of autonomy in terms of their able to self-govern. He runs Chechnya, according to rights groups, as more or less his own kingdom with very little interference from federal authorities, but also not following along all the time with Russian federal laws. Big rights crackdown leading up to the election. There was a report by Human Rights Watch saying how there was a lot of pressure not only on the opposition groups but also on any outspoken critics of Kadyrov.
So in order to impose that kind of authority, a lot of his critics say that Kadyrov is just another old-fashioned dictator. So how do you account for his popularity there among Chechens?
Well, he is able to bring in a lot of money. He's been able to build up the main city, the capital Grozny. He's been able to attract some investment, and that's a big change from the decades of war that had been the norm in Chechnya for such a long time. So there is a large degree of peace and stability, at least on the surface. And as long as you don't cross Kadyrov or the people that are in power in Chechnya, you can lead more or less a normal life. So it's a matter of stability, but the people of Chechnya, as one analyst here at Moscow told me, have paid a fairly large price for that stability in terms of individual rights. Is
that, Daniel, how he's managed to keep Islamic insurgents in check? There haven't been very many attacks there, I believe, since 2014. Are those Islamic insurgents still active there, or has he essentially strong-armed them out of existence in Chechnya?
Well, there have been, as you mentioned, occasional attacks. The last one, I believe, was December 2014, where we had a suicide bomber in Grozny outside of a concert hall. There was about 5 police officers were killed, and a number of people were injured in that. So certainly the insurgency has not been wiped out completely, but we do see a decreasing amount of casualties among the security forces. So certainly he has made a big impact on taking that insurgency apart, lessening the amount of fighting that's going on. But in the methods that he uses to do that are quite controversial. And of course, he gets a lot of criticism for them, including collective punishment for relatives of insurgents. He received some rare criticism from Russian President Vladimir Putin at one of his press conferences when he was asked about the Kadyrov's burning down of the homes of relatives of insurgents as retribution for their having relatives who were involved in insurgency or accused of being militants. And President Putin had some mild criticism, basically saying that that was inappropriate. So certainly there's been some criticism of his methods, and according to rights groups, rightfully so.
But isn't it also true, Daniel, that many of those Islamic insurgents ended up traveling to Syria to fight with Islamic State? Isn't that what happened?
Well, this is one of the big concerns that we have now in Russia. There have been hundreds of Russian citizens from the Caucasus, including Chechnya, according to Russian officials, who have gone to Syria to fight with rebels and terrorist groups there, including Islamic State. And big concern is that they may come back to Russia and bring some of that ideology, some of that fight back with them. So certainly, if there are a large group of people who have been disaffected, who don't like the way Kadyrov is running Chechnya, they don't like the way he has more or less total control over the republic, they would be fairly susceptible to terrorist recruitment. And certainly there's a lot of concern that there could be attacks that may happen here in Russia as a result of so many Russian citizens fighting with terrorist groups inside Syria.
Well, thanks for all that information, and thanks for manning the fort all by yourself, Daniel Sheriff in Moscow. Time now for a short break. Daniel is back in our second segment. as authorities conclude a 2-year investigation into the downing of Malaysian passenger jet MH17 over eastern Ukraine. This is the Correspondents on Voice of America.
From science and technology, here's what's new.
More maize is produced annually than any other grain on Earth, and it's the most important cereal crop in sub-Saharan Africa. Maize, or corn as it's known in the United States, is susceptible to a type of mold called mycotoxin. The mold raises the risk of chronic diseases, including cancer. Now, South African high school students Kaliswa Nchinga and Yolanda Nkala say they can reduce mycotoxin in maize by 98%. Yolanda Nkala.
So with our experiment, we came up with 3 simple methods in which people can be able to use those methods at home, and that is to be able to visually sort the maize.
The young researchers have been working with scientists in South Africa, including Dr. Hester Berger.
This is quite incredible for us because we are always looking for sustainable, cultural, and sort of affordable methods to reduce mycotoxin exposure in rural areas.
For VOA's What's New, I'm Todd Grosson.
And welcome back to the Correspondents on Voice of America. I'm Milar Sega in Washington. Well, finally, after a 2-year probe, a multinational investigation into the downing of Malaysian Airlines flight MH17 en route from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur on July 2014 has concluded. The Dutch-led probe confirms the Boeing 777 was shot down over eastern Ukraine by a surface-to-air missile that was transported from Russia into rebel-held territory in Ukraine. Moscow continues to dispute those findings and denies any involvement. VOA's Henry Ridgewell now with more on what killed all 298 people aboard that ill-fated flight.
The conclusions of the joint investigation team are clear. Flight MH17 was shot down by an SA-11 Buk surface-to-air missile transported from Russia to Ukrainian territory, then controlled by Moscow-backed rebels. But key questions remain unanswered.
Was it an error? Was it intentional? Who was in charge? Who issued the order? Those are the subsequent questions, and that's what we have to explore.
The families of the victims have waited more than 2 years for answers. Hans de Boer's 17-year-old daughter, Elsa Miek, was among the 298 victims.
Up till now, there were a lot of speculations, but I see this as something really, a big relief for me.
Russia has consistently denied any involvement and has claimed the airliner was downed either by a Ukrainian fighter jet or shot down from Ukrainian territory. But the evidence against that is overwhelming.
And for more now on the downing of MH17, we are joined once again on Skype by VOA Moscow correspondent Daniel Sheriff. And right here in Washington, I'm joined by my good friend, VOA senior analyst Jeffrey Young. Thank you both for joining us today. Daniel, I'm going to start with you. This investigation, obviously, as you say, not sitting well in Moscow. What is it about this, the investigation's findings that Russia is disagreeing with?
Well, from the beginning, Russia has painted this investigation and a previous investigation by the Dutch Safety Board as being politically motivated, as being already making conclusions before they find evidence. And they've also pointed out that the fact that Ukraine was one of the members of the joint investigative team, along with Australia, the Dutch, of course, Belgium, and Malaysia, makes it a biased investigation, that they believe that Ukraine has been feeding false information to the investigative team, and therefore they're essentially making up facts in order to justify a conclusion that they've already made ahead of time. Right. That's the opinion of Moscow, and they back that up, of course, with all the Kremlin-controlled media here in Russia.
Jeff, I know you've been digging into this story quite a bit. So politically motivated, biased, what kind of evidence did the Dutch probe come up with that links Russia directly to this the downing of MH17?
The report used a combination of electronic intelligence, eyewitness accounts, and social media. They were able, with these elements and with other things that they're not talking about, and I'm sure that there's a lot of upper-level intelligence activity that was involved in this. The evening of July 16, 2014, there were intercepted telephone conversations with Russian separatists asking for a BUK missile system to be brought
so there
into
is that
their
electronic
territory.
record of communications beforehand.
There
right?
are.
Okay. And then what happens after that?
The missile, according to these accounts, was brought into separatist territory in Ukraine from Russia on the evening of July 16th. It was during the day of the 17th that the missile was fired and Malaysian Airlines MH17 was downed.
It's pretty clear that whoever shot down this plane must have thought it was something other than what it was, a passenger plane.
The reason that the separatists were asking for a BUK anti-aircraft missile system to be brought into Ukraine was they were fearing Ukrainian Air Force airstrikes. All right? Now, anytime that a missile like this is fired in a system like this, you have an acquisition radar. What is puzzling about this and difficult to explain is an airliner that is cruising at least 10,000 meters, if not more, is not an aircraft that is low to the ground and about to conduct an airstrike.
Sure.
And their acquisition radar may have had the ability to discern the transponder. All airliners have a transponder, and the transponder identifies, this is who I am, this is who I am, this is who I am. And anyone who can pick this up knows what the aircraft is. And MH17's transponder, according to accounts, was on and functioning.
It makes anyone who shot down that plane look very bad indeed. So Daniel, let me get you back into this. Apparently, Russia is now calling for a separate investigation. On what grounds? What kind of new evidence could they possibly bring forward here?
Well, just days ahead of the release of the JIT report, the Russians did come up with some radar data, which they say proves one of their positions, that the Buk was not launched from rebel territory, but was launched from Ukrainian-controlled territory. The interesting thing about that new piece of evidence, as they call it, is not only that it was suddenly discovered just a few days ahead of the release of this report, but also that it seems to contradict their earlier position about a year ago, where they were saying that it was a Ukrainian jet that had shot down the Malaysian airline, and that they had radar data showing that there was a jet in the airspace over rebel-controlled territory. The new radar data they released this past week showed that there was nothing in the air above the rebel territory, no Ukrainian jet, no missiles. So they seem to be contradicting themselves, but this has been something that's been a problem from the Russian side from the beginning as well, that they've been putting out a lot of different versions of what possibly may have been responsible for this terrible tragedy.
Jeffrey, I want you to talk about what we seem to be seeing is this pattern of denial, disinformation. We already saw this just a couple of weeks ago with the Russian airstrike against a UN aid convoy in Syria. Now we're hearing similar denials here in this case. Is this kind of a political pattern that we need to get used to when it comes to dealing with the Russians? What are you finding out?
It's useful for them to at times present as many different forms of reality as possible. If I give you scenarios A, B, C, and D, I can scramble the eggs to the point where the average person can't sort it out.
So the technique is confusion.
It is. And one of the more fascinating scenarios that was put forth from the Russian side was that this was a CIA operation and that the airliner that was shot down had 298 corpses, people dead, on board the plane.
Stuff that doesn't really make sense. So give me the bottom line here, Jeff. What is the reason behind these denials? Is Russia perhaps worried about possible implications, legal ramifications of something like this? Could some of the families of the Dutch victims turn around and sue Russia? Is that a possibility?
This will be interesting to see. I think you'll have to look at the premise of, will they be able to avoid being sued and found guilty through sovereign immunity? And we have a case here in the United States that just happened in the last couple of days where Congress passed a bill that basically exposed the Saudi Arabian government to possible lawsuits from people who were killed on September 11, 2001.
Okay.
And Russia may invoke sovereign immunity in this case. Collecting may be difficult, but again, one case to look at in the past was Lockerbie, Pan Am 103 Lockerbie in the late 1980s.
Daniel, I'm out of time, but perhaps you can answer this very quickly. Russia obviously appealing to the UN International Civil Aviation Organization, the ICAO, to reopen the investigation. Is that likely? Is that even possible? Is that something they might consider?
Well, that's a good question, but I think that we're going to see the Dutch investigation move further ahead. This
could be the
most
final
credible investigation that's come out so far, and they're going to be looking for suspects and trying to push Russia for answers. Russia is now claiming that it's going to provide more evidence and information to the investigators. Whether or not Russia is going to be willing to actually cooperate in terms of providing any details of where their boots were at the time, and where these suspects may be, and whether or not they'd even be willing to turn anybody over for questioning, of course. There's a big question mark there.
We shall see. Thank you again, Daniel Sheriff, our reporter in Moscow, and to our senior analyst, Jeffrey Young. Still ahead, 1 down, 2 to go in the U.S. presidential debates between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And just a reminder, we want to hear from you. Share your thoughts, questions, and comments on our Facebook page. The address is VOA, The Correspondents. We'll be right back.
Health news and notes. This is Living Better.
Living to be 100 is no big deal in Acciaroli. In this village in southern Italy of only 2,000 people, 300 residents have lived for a century or more. Researchers want to know why. Amina Fodolo is 93. We eat a lot of fish and fresh produce and olive oil, she says. These are components of the Mediterranean diet known to researchers since the 1950s. Now, Italian and American scientists like Alan Mizell are trying to find out if there's something in addition to what the locals eat that makes them live so long.
Is there something in their genes that may, along with something they do, make them live longer and healthy?
Researchers looked at 80 elderly people from Acciaroli who are physically active and also breathe unpolluted air and live stress-free lives. Factors researchers are trying to understand for their possible roles in longevity. I'm Martin Seacrest for VOA's Living Better.
For comprehensive 2016 U.S. presidential election reporting, turn to the source you trust most. Voice of America's USA Votes coverage. Only on VOA.
And welcome back to The Correspondents on Voice of America. I'm Millar Sega. Well, Democrat Hillary Clinton is hoping for a boost in the polls following her first debate with Republican rival Donald Trump. A CNN ORC poll taken right after the debate found that 2/3 of those who watched the debate thought Clinton won that debate. But of course, all that depends on who's talking. The debate at Hofstra University in New York is just the first of 3 between the 2 White House contenders. VOA national correspondent Jim Malone takes a look now at some of the back and forth.
The 2 candidates clashed over Trump's business background, Clinton's experience in government, and where each of them would like to take the country.
Go to her website. She tells you how to fight ISIS on her website. I don't think General Douglas MacArthur would like that too much.
Well, at least I have a plan to fight ISIS.
No, you're telling the enemy everything you want to do.
No, we're not.
Trump also defended his decision not to release his tax returns, which are under audit, even though past candidates have done so.
I will release my tax returns against my lawyer's wishes when she releases her 33,000 emails that have been deleted.
And I have no reason to believe that he's ever going to release his tax returns because there's something he's hiding.
I've been all over the place. You decided to stay home, and that's okay.
I think Donald just criticized me for preparing for this debate. And yes, I did. And you know what else I prepared for? I prepared to be president.
So, who made a stronger case to be the next U.S. president? Well, to help us out with that, I'm joined right here in the studio by VOA national correspondent Jim Malone, who prepared that report for us, And joining us from our New York studio, VOA's Ramon Taylor, who watched that debate in person at Hofstra University. Welcome, gentlemen, and thanks for joining me. Jim, I guess I'm going to ask you the tough question. How would you rate the performance of these two candidates in their first debate? Did one seem more presidential than the other?
Well, quickly, that's going to be up to the voters, and we are getting more polls now in the last few days that shows Clinton looking as though she's getting a bump out of this, 1 to 5 points, not only a little bit nationally, but in some key state polls, which, of course, is where the election will be won. Look, the demeanor, Trump actually started strong in the debate, put her on the defensive over trade, but as the debate wore on, Clinton kept putting out these attacks that Trump could not resist responding to, seemed to get off track. He was very aggressive. He interrupted her a lot. Clinton's demeanor was cool, calm, collected for the most part. It seemed to help her.
How do you think voters are going to look at that, his frequent interruptions?
Well, I think women voters in particular have voiced some concerns about this, and we all know that's an area that's been weak for him anyway. He needs to shore it up. And, of course, attacking a former beauty queen who he dealt with,
help.
That's probably not going to help.
Especially when she happens to be Latina.
Right.
Now, Ramon, it's unusual for candidates to go directly to the spin room themselves to talk about their debate performance, but that was not the case with Donald Trump. You were there. What did he have to say to reporters? How did he justify or defend his performance?
Yeah, it was a strange thing, and by that point, I think clearly Hillary Clinton had moved on. She was already getting ready to speak at a rally. Donald Trump really came with a message of exactly what you would expect from a spin room. I did really well. I liked my performance. And here's the weird thing. He came out saying, I'm really proud of myself for not saying the thing that I wanted to say, which I really might want to say in the next debate, and that is Bill Clinton's indiscretion. So it was a really, really odd thing to come out right after his debate performance and kind of suggest what might be an issue, even if it wasn't in this first debate.
Jim, I want you to respond to that. Donald Trump threatening to bring up Bill Clinton's indiscretions. Is that wise debate policy, especially when you're debating a woman?
It would seem to be pretty risky, that there's a lot of downsides to going there. This is something that happened almost 20 years ago.
Right.
He wants to dredge that up. It may help him with his base core of supporters. They don't seem to be dissuaded, by the way, about Trump one way or the other.
Because from what I recall, Hillary Clinton seemed to be quite popular during those times, seen as the suffering
right. Now, here's the thing,
wife.
Mel, though. In these debates, the unanticipated can happen. So the Clinton campaign is going to be ready for this, but you never know how it's going to play out.
Which is the reason I suspect that you're enjoying this election cycle so much. Now, Ramon, let me get you back into this. So you watched this debate with a group of millennial voters. Tell me, what did they see?
Yeah, well, a lot of these millennial voters on college campuses nationwide tend to be more liberal ideologically. In this case, we're in Long Island. There's a bit more of a split there. But what they were looking for was really a Hillary Clinton that's going to really get them to the polls this election, where they've been really sort of more apathetic compared to last election. So for a generation that has been going to the polls at numbers around 46%, that's really, really not going to cut it. And so Clinton needs to shore up some of that support.
Do you think, Jim, the debate managed to lure or attract any new independent voters?
We'll see. There are some independent candidates in the running. They've had their own missteps. The reforming of the Obama coalition is key for Clinton. The young people, the millennials. She needs to get them out to vote in a big way.
Well, we're looking forward to the next debate. Thank you so much, Jim and Ramon. That is our show for today. But we'll be back again next week for another edition of The Correspondents. In the meantime, stay up to date with all the news wherever you are at voanews.com. You can also check out all our shows there. Just go to the Watch tab on the upper right of our webpage. We're also on Facebook and YouTube at VOA The Correspondents. Thanks for watching. I'm Neil Arcega. For now, so long from Washington.
Around the clock, the Voice of America provides you with comprehensive African and world news. Wake up with Daybreak Africa. Then in the evening, listen to Africa News Tonight. And on weekends, it's Nightline Africa. In between, you'll hear VOA newscasts at the top of each hour. VOA, bringing the world to you.